I want us to spend a few minutes, guys, going back and looking at where we are, historically speaking, and from a big picture. I think last time we did a pretty decent job of zooming in, and we were focusing on some of the specific trees, but I think it's very, very useful to occasionally zoom out and take a look from the forest to kind of appreciate, okay, here's how far we've come, here's what the big picture is in God's message, and here's where we are. Everybody knows, beyond the shadow of a doubt, 1,500 years roughly from Adam to Noah. What was the incident of the flood for? Ultimately, what was the main reason the flood was here?
Wickedness of man.
Okay, we got sin, we got to clean up sin. Right after that, we've got a Tower of Babel, we've got the dispersion of people, we got new languages. So already in your mind, what you need to have pictured there is cultural languages. You're starting things like the Chinese people, you're starting things like all the different tribes down in Africa. That's going to be an offshoot of this particular dispersion. We then spent roughly 2 weeks, 3 weeks looking at the lineage from Abraham on to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph, getting us into Egypt. Through God's providence, there was a famine coming. He was able to take this special group and he was able to transfer them into Egypt. Perfect time, perfect conditions, everything worked out just like a masterpiece. Joseph goes through all these struggles and trials. You know, to me, he's one of the best examples of where we need to have our own children. You know, one of my goals personally is to get my kids by the age of 16 or 17 to a point where they can stand up against anything. I hear the question quite often, and you guys will hear it too, which Christian school do you recommend, or which college do you recommend? My answer will probably surprise most of you, and that is I don't really recommend Christian schools because I think there's wolves in sheep's clothing at many of them. In fact, I know there's wolves' clothing in several of them, and I think if you send your kid there thinking, hey, they're going to be safe, then the wolves eat them up. My thing would be get your child faithful enough to where they can withstand anything, and then send them to a great school to get a good education. I would say probably the biggest influence on kids during college is going to be whichever congregation is associated with that university. If you've got a strong campus kind of ministry or a family network of people who actually look out for their college kids kind of like they would a family member, to me that's going to probably play a stronger role in keeping them faithful than sending them off to so-and-so university. We then we split the lineage. We talked a little bit about Judah. That's where Christ was going to come. And ultimately, then we crossed over into the book of Exodus looking at Moses and what he was doing to continue this story, this deliverance, so to speak. We had several different miracles performed by Moses. How do you defend, if I come to you, let's say, I'm going to just call on people randomly here. Jonathan, if I call on you randomly and just say, hey, you know, I don't really know that I believe in God or anything, how do you defend miracles? Because I ain't never seen one.
No.
What would you say?
Well, first of all, I make sure that you believe in the Bible. If you don't believe in the Bible, then there's no reason to even continue that conversation.
Well, you know, I think the Bible's a pretty good book. It's got some good stuff in it.
Okay, and then if you can agree that the Bible is a pretty good book, then maybe you can agree that some of the facts that are in it are legible enough for you to believe that the things that happen in the Bible did happen here on earth, especially since we have so much proof.
But we've never seen one.
Well, to look at the historical proof that is found in the Bible, some of the things that happened in Babylon, the written things that are found there, compared to what are the things found in archaeological things. The history of the Jews being in certain cities compared to what the Bible says these are where they were in these time frames. If you can say this is true, then we can start looking at the times and dates of the accounts that happen in the Bible and those miracles. And we can break those down.
Well, I'll pick up from there. let's say that I'm coming at you and I say, look, I've never seen a miracle. How about we just agree that the Bible's a good book, and I believe in Jesus, but I don't believe in miracles. Maybe all that stuff is maybe that's just like stories to get across something, a moral message.
What are you calling a miracle? What do you consider a miracle? What is a miracle to you?
Well, I mean, I ain't never seen nobody part the Red Sea.
Well, have you been over there? I guess I would have to say that, number one, we'd have to look in the book of Acts to where the power was given for miracles to be performed. First of all, see where they came from, which would have been God from the beginning of the Bible. And just take them through some of the texts like the parting of the Red Sea, but then basically try to lead someone up to the point of what a miracle is, and the difference between the miracles in the Bible and the miracles of today and what we consider a miracle.
Okay, you guys are missing one main point. I'm going to ask somebody else. Let's go with Justin.
All right,
Tell me.
You said you believe in Jesus, right?
Yeah, I believe in Jesus.
All right. Well, what do you believe Jesus was? A man? Just a man?
Well, I mean, obviously he was a great man.
So you believe that Jesus was a great man, right? But not necessarily anything supernatural about it, right?
Well,
how do you
maybe with Jesus, but I don't know about all this other stuff.
Well, if it could be with Jesus, then why couldn't it be in other cases?
Okay, that's a good point. Guys, y'all are missing the main point of what were the emphasis of miracles? Why were they miracles? Yeah.
Without the miracles, there would be no Word of God.
Okay. Without miracles, there would be no Word of God. And ultimately, what was the purpose of a miracle?
The point of the God to confirm the Word.
Now we're starting to get closer to the answer I'm looking for. Miracles showed God's power. The problem that we have in the church today in many situations is a lot of Christians don't want to even really deal with miracles simply because they're outside of what we are used to normally seeing. And their neighbors and their friends and their coworkers ridicule them if they talk about a miracle. Guys, if you take miracles out of the plan, you think about what you've done, number one, to the power of God. You've limited him. But number two, think about what some of the specific miracles was. The creation account in and of itself was the very first miracle. If you can't accept that, how do you get off anywhere else? And then ultimately, I think somebody was kind of trying to get there, talking about Jesus. Guys, if he didn't get up out of that tomb, we don't have any hope.
Amen.
And so, the two things that when you're talking to people about miracles, I think Christians need to learn how to defend them better because we're very weak on that area. But we need to remember ultimately what was their purpose and how does that affect our relationship with Christ? Because if Jesus didn't make it out of that tomb, you and I don't have any hope. And that's where I would go with somebody who says, well, I've never seen a miracle. Well, that's true. There's a lot of things we haven't seen, but do you believe that Jesus Christ is still in a tomb somewhere? 95% of the people that say they believe in a God are going to come back to you and say, well, no, I guess he made it out. Well, if he made it out, that's a miracle. That's the only thing that gives us hope. And if they say he didn't make it out, then you got to look them in the eye and say, why in the world do you even care if there's a God? Because right now your life is pretty much hopeless. If Christ can't get out of the tomb, what hope do you have? Okay? So, I say all that to say this. In looking, backing away, looking at these miracles, crossing the Red Sea, the plagues, things like that, I don't think it's a preacher's job to be able to stand up in front of a crowd and be able to recite every single miracle that's ever happened. But I do think it is your responsibility to be able to look at people in the eye and say, folks, there are a lot of miraculous events that happened in the Bible, starting with the creation account. These were to show the power of God, And ultimately, as Christians, we shouldn't be shying away from them. We don't need to be scared of them, but rather we need to be prepared to defend them and how it fits into the grand scheme of things. Comments? Questions? All right, still looking from 10,000 feet. We got Moses. He crosses the Red Sea. You got these people. They're complaining. They're whining. You all know the account where they're saying, hey, we want something to eat. He gives them something to eat. We want something to drink. He gives them something to drink. Lo and behold, finally, they journey. They make their way to Sinai. He goes up on the mountain. They feel like he's gone too long. They make a golden calf. He comes down. He's angry. He basically smashes it into pieces, makes them drink the gold. And then what happens? Does it stay smashed?
Goes back up there and gets another set.
Goes back up there and gets another set. God says, get a couple more stones. We're going to do this one more time. He comes back down and he's got the law, and we start the Mosaic period. So from a 10,000-foot perspective, we've just left the patriarchal period. Now we're in the Mosaic age. Now we're about ready to start learning how, for instance, to worship properly. What does God expect from priests? What does God expect from tithing? What are the new moral laws that are going to be put in place? And that gaps us over into the book of Leviticus. When you look at the book of Leviticus, what he is ultimately doing is he is laying down a guidebook of laws regulating the priests, regulating purity, regulating sacrifices. He is pronouncing holy days. So it's kind of like, okay, guys, we've gone from this one era to this next one. Now I'm going to detail for you everything you need to know. This is the fine print, so to speak. So flip back open to Leviticus chapter 1. Let me kind of give you some highlights. You guys can kind of just jot down in your Bible. Leviticus 1, he gives specifics on burnt offerings. You'll notice, for instance, the animal's body was to be consumed entirely by fire. This was to be a free will offering. In other words, surrendering of life to the will of God. It was the giving of something important, something of value. You know, God didn't just say, you know what I want you to do? I want you to go through your closet and find your hand-me-down clothes and bring them to me and put them in this Goodwill bin, and that's good enough. He wanted something of value. It was to be an atonement. It was deliberate. There were specifics about it, and it was ultimately to be pleasing to God. Now, I would throw in there, if you look very carefully, you'll notice it talks about the hide of this animal was given to the priests to be used in whatever manner they needed to use it in. We then look at, towards the middle of that particular chapter, it talks about offering of sheep and goats, offering of fowl. You flip over to Leviticus chapter 2. We've got a meal offering. That is a bloodless offering. Again, this is voluntary. The priest burned a portion, retained the balance. It was usually an offering of unleavened bread or cakes. Why do you think leaven was forbidden to be burned on an altar?
It represented sin symbolically to the Israelites.
Exactly. What's the classic quote? What's the classic scripture we often use? A little
leaven leavens the whole lump.
There you go. What about honey? Now, if you look through chapter 2, guys, he also forbids honey to be offered. Or to be burned, excuse me. It can be offered but not burned. Now, this is one of those little weird tweaked scientific things. Why do you think that was thrown out there? What is honey made up of? Man, we think
David said bee spit. So,
bee spit. Oh, okay. We're going to have a biology 101 class, I can tell. Okay, real quickly. Bees go out, they collect pollen. They bring the pollen back, they make nectar, they make honey in the hive. Well, let me rephrase this. What is one of the main things, though, that is collected in that process that we just talked about?
Pollen.
Yeast. Leaven. How is yeast collected? Because it's everywhere. It's in the air. So you've got these bees that are going around, they're collecting pollen, but at the same time they're picking up yeast, which is a form of leaven. That was basically the leavening agent. God says, not only do I not want you to have leaven, I don't want you to have honey that's probably got leaven in it. We then look at chapter 3, and he starts with a peace offering. Again, this is an offering of your herd. It was male or female, bull, calf, ox, etc. You'll notice starting in about verse 6 through 11, it's an offering of the flock. You were forbidden to eat the fat or the blood of that particular creature. Chapter 4, we talked a little bit last Tuesday about a sin offering. And you guys remember, we read the entire chapter of chapter 4 just to kind of get the impression of what they had to go through versus where we are today. The sin is done through ignorance, verse 2, then here's what has to happen. Verses 3 through 12, if a high priest were to sin. Verses 13 through 21, if the whole congregation of Israel sinned, here's the stipulations. Verses 22 through 26, if a ruler sins. So you've got all these different things. Yeah.
Was this unintentional sin? Was this sin without knowing?
Look at verse 2. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a person sins unintentionally against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything which ought not to be done, and does any of them, then it starts telling you what's going on.
So this would be, this does show the beginning of this, the very beginning of this, because at this point they didn't know a whole lot about what sins or what sin was actually.
Right. He is laying out the guidebook from this point on. Look, this is what I expect. This is what I don't expect. And if you think about it for just a moment, guys, in the Christian walk, there are probably more times that we sin by omission, probably more than we sin by commission. And by that I mean, let's say that we know somebody's going through a rough time and we don't say anything. Or we know that somebody is struggling financially and we basically smile at them and give them that be ye warmed and filled look. There's a lot of times in our Christian walk where we don't do something when we probably should. And that's this unintentional sin, what he's laying out right here. He then immediately in chapter 5, he moves into trespasses. Trespass offering. Okay, if the trespass is done in ignorance, verse 14, here's what the situation is. Here's what the restitution is. Failing to pay tithes and offerings to Jehovah, verses 15 through 19. Here is again what the punishment's going to be. Chapter 6 and 7 then go on to basically, if you're looking at it from a high perspective, they go on to give you more details about sacrifices specifically. So, again, from a big perspective, here's what I want you to remember. We got this group of people. They follow Moses out. They've been delivered up. Moses comes down the second time with the commandments. They are a freed people, a chosen nation. But now what they need is the book of instructions on how to live their life. And that's what we're reading. That's what we're spending this whole week on. We flip over to chapter 8. And we start getting the priestly system ordered. Okay, not only do the people need to be orderly, not only do we need to have things in order as far as our sacrifice system, but now we got to design a method to keep all this in place, and that's going to be under a priestly nation. So, Aaron, I want you and your boys to come here. We're going to talk about this. We're going to consecrate you. We're going to separate you. At the end of chapter 9, about look at verse 24. Fire came out from before the Lord, consumed the burnt offering, and the fat on the altar. When all the people saw it, they shouted, they fell on their faces. So you can kind of put an asterisk right there, that here we've got an example of God accepting this sacrifice, this new system. This is kind of the whistleblowing or the gunfire of a new race or a new age. And there was your first time right there. Questions, comments up to that point? What I will do to make life easier on you, because I realize some of y'all are writing furiously right now, I've got an outline that I will post up on my iDisk, and you guys can kind of look at it. It's basically it's just the main points of Leviticus. We go into chapter 11. We started talking last time about foods, which foods were clean, which ones were not clean. Now again, why was he doing that? What's the big deal about the food? Say that again?
To keep them healthy and
keep them healthy, okay. You guys remember the 3 boxes? We've got to have a clean people to get inside one of those inner boxes. Remember, it's the non-Israelites are on the outside box. They're unclean. In order to go from an unclean state to a clean state, we got to consider what we're putting in our bodies, how we treat our bodies, how we wash our bodies, how we deal with the dead. So this was a step to make these people different from all of the other tribes around them that were basically nasty. So we start looking, and he says, okay, here are the animals you can eat. Here are the animals you can't eat. Here's how we clean up after childbirth. Here are the laws concerning leprosy. All the way to chapter 15, which is where we left off last time. Here's the law concerning discharges. So again, all of this is ceremonial cleansing. It's actual cleansing to make these people stand out and to be clean. We get to chapter 16, the Day of Atonement. Now the Lord spoke. This is where we're picking up today. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, when they had offered profane fire before the Lord and died. The Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil. He goes on to say, before the mercy seat which is on the ark, lest he die, for I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. Thus Aaron shall come into the holy place with the blood of a young bull as a sin offering, and of a ram as a burnt offering. Could the priest during this particular time approach God any way he wanted? No, he had to be clean, guys. Now, let's translate, let's take this passage, Leviticus 16, and let's move it into the year 2009 to Bear Valley. Do you feel like you can get up in a pulpit and preach and teach even though your life is not clean?
No.
Do you think preachers do?
Yes.
Yes, they do. Guys, if there's one thing that I can get across to you, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, if there's one thing I can get across to you in this class, then I feel like I've done my work, and that is make sure the person who is preaching in that pulpit is the same person outside the pulpit.
That's right.
That is very, very important, guys. It's so easy for you to get puffed up and feel good and hear all these praises from little old blue-haired ladies when you're up there preaching, but are you truly clean? And by that I mean, is your life what it needs to be a representative of God? What are some things that preachers struggle with today that they need to get cleaned up?
Internet pornography.
Internet pornography. You know what I heard this week? I think, well, you guys know this. Cindy Colley, I think, was out there recently. Did you guys hear her talking about 7 out of 8 male students at Freed Hardeman have a problem with internet porn? 7 out of 8. Which, sadly, you kind of wonder, okay, was the 8th one gay? I mean, in all seriousness, though, guys, that's hideous. I would not allow my child to go into that situation. That's scary to me. So yeah, internet porn is a struggle. What are some other struggles? What are things that you all personally may need to get cleaned up? I'll throw out a few. Think about these. What about finances? Do we have any preachers that don't have their financial house in order?
Sure we do.
Yeah, we do. In fact, if you think about the way we treat the church, from about the age of 13 to 22, do we have any financial expectations on young people? No, not at all. You throw a few bucks in, you hit 22, all of a sudden you're ready to buy a house or get an apartment. Lo and behold, you don't have any money. So God gets the leftovers. We got a lot of preachers who are giving God the leftovers when it comes to giving. What about things like time? Do we have preachers that struggle with time? Yeah, we got preachers that don't know how to balance family with work. Or what about chat rooms? Do we have any preachers that are spending more time in chat rooms than they are studying the Bible? Yeah. Now, guys, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know y'all's daily how stressful it is for y'all every single day. How much free time you have. But let me just tell you, if you guys participate in some of these internet web chats, get out of them. I have a lot of people who, on occasion, they'll send me an email that says, "Hey, Brad, they're talking about one of your articles on this chat site," or "Hey, Brad, they're dogging you on this one." I don't have time for that. I recognize that a good name is worth a lot, and I want my name to be clean and upheld, but at the same time, I'm not going to spend all of my time that I could be doing the Lord's work responding to internet chat forums. So don't allow yourself to get caught up in. There's some very legalistic people out there that would love for y'all to jump in so that they can do anything and everything they can. All right, so the Day of Atonement. What was the Day of Atonement? Somebody tell me just in general terms. Oh, y'all better put a big asterisk by this chapter. This was an important day. This was the day that all of the sins of the people were atoned for. So basically, this was kind of like their New Year's Day. They get a fresh start, fresh slate. Look with me starting in verse 20. See if some of this doesn't ring a bell to you. When he has made an end of atoning for the holy place, the tabernacle of meeting, and the altar, he shall bring the live goat. Aaron shall lay both of his hands on the head of the live goat, confess over it all of the iniquities of the children of Israel, all of their transgressions, concerning all of their sins, putting them on the head of the goat. And he shall send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a suitable man. The goat shall bear on itself all of their iniquities to the uninhabited land. He shall release the goat into the wilderness. How many of you in there have ever heard the word scapegoat? That's what we're talking about right here. In fact, if you look down at verse 26, and he who released the goat as the scapegoat shall wash his clothes, bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. So, guys, here's what they literally did. One day a year, the priest was responsible for atoning for all the sins of the people. Now, obviously, if things happened throughout the year, they had to atone for that too, but this was kind of the house cleaning day. And in order to do that, they bring a goat, they put on the goat, figuratively speaking, all of the sins of the people. They send that goat out into the wilderness, basically as a symbol of getting the sin out of the camp. And that goat bore their sin. Now, let's talk for just a minute. What's the problem with this method?
Well, the goat could wander back into the camp.
Okay, goat can wander back into camp, and all of a sudden you got all the sins of the people chewing up the dandelions outside of your tent. What else?
Well, the goat's
Why?
not perfect. The
Goat is not.
isn't a perfect sacrifice for sin.
Mr. Cooper.
They have to do it every year.
Every year. What are they? We use a phrase in the church. We say the sins were.
Some people say they were rolled forward.
Yeah, roll forward.
That's the phrase a lot of times you'll hear, and that's where they're getting this from. Is every year basically it was kind of okay, we're putting off the inevitable. We're putting off the inevitable. I don't necessarily like that phrase. I think it's kind of but every single year they had to go through this process because they did, like Jared said, they didn't have a perfect sacrifice. Okay, look all the way down at the bottom of this chapter. Verse 34. This shall be an everlasting statute for you, to make atonement for the children of Israel for all of their sins once a year, and he did as the Lord commanded Moses. So every single year, we got to whip out our instruction manual. We got to remember exactly how we're supposed to do this, under what conditions we have to do it. The priests have to be clean themselves. They have to clean everything. They have to offer the sacrifice in the right way. And yet today, if Chris sins, how does he fix that?
Prayer.
He's got a mediator. He's got the perfect sacrifice that continually washes him. So major difference. This is the kind of thing, I asked you guys a question about if somebody says they're under the Ten Commandments. This is the kind of thing that ultimately, when you got a chance to sit down with that person and you look them in the eye and you say, okay, so you believe in the Ten Commandments here, these Ten Commandments are good, we observe 9 of them. At some point, if you can get that person to actually start studying, yes, they had 10 Commandments, but look at all these other principles that were tied to them. And ask them, are you following all this? Are you still keeping up with the Day of Atonement? And they say, no, we got Jesus Christ. Okay, what did Jesus Christ do for you? And basically it can start to become a self-discovery. They can actually go, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of get that now. Starting in chapter 17, we've got blood becoming the central issue. If you notice very carefully, let's see, 1 through 9, in verses 1 through 9, they're very specific that these sacrifices take place at the tabernacle and not away from the tabernacle. Again, God has said, I want it done this way, and it needs to be done in the right setting. Look at verse 7 with me. They shall no more offer their sacrifices to demons, after whom they have played the harlot. This shall be a statute forever for them throughout their generations. It's talking about the priest here. Verse 6, and the priest shall sprinkle the blood on the altar of the Lord at the door of the tabernacle meeting and burn the fat for sweet aroma to the Lord. They shall no more offer their sacrifices to demons. So apparently back then they even had problems with some of their people, some of their religious people, who were buying into other things, i.e. worldly things. Look at verse 11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. If you don't have a big fat asterisk beside that verse in your Bible, you better put one there. That right there starts letting you know the importance of blood in this whole picture. It does two things for me personally. Number one, it tells me when life begins. It talks about blood. But number two, more importantly, it tells me that if I'm going to be atoned for, there's got to be a blood exchange. And as a scientist, as somebody who's searching, I want to know, what is that blood? Where did the blood come from? How does that blood get to me? And that's why when somebody taught me many years ago, the only way I can come in contact with the blood is to be buried with Christ in baptism, that's why I got it. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Questions, comments up through there? Yes, sir.
Could you tell us a little bit about verse 13?
Verse 13. Whatever man of the children of Israel, or of strangers who dwell among you, who hunts and catches any animal or any bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with dust. Again, as you read through the commands of God, he over and over and over says, yeah, you can eat meat, but not the blood. And here he's saying, when you go out and hunt something, let's say you kill a deer, let's say you kill a whatever animal, you can eat that animal, but get rid of the blood. And by that, basically, if you picture in your mind somebody who's killed a deer, what do we do to the deer? We hang it up in a tree, we slit it, bleeds out to get rid of the blood out of its body. Same thing with pork. I don't know how many of you guys grew up on a farm, but if you've ever killed pork for meat, now that you used to thump them in the head or shoot them in the head, one of the first things you do is you try to get that animal upright, you slit its neck so that it'll bleed out, because you don't want the blood in meat. A lot of that actually comes from this passage, getting rid of the blood. Now, the other part would be the fact that it doesn't taste as good. It's got an iron taste to it. Yes, sir.
Is it wrong to eat rare meat?
Like if you go to Logan's Steakhouse and order a steak rare.
Really bloody?
Is it wrong? Yeah. Let me just say I'm not a judge. But I will say this. I know the way we process meat in America today, they have pretty much drained the animals already. Yeah, there's going to be some blood left over in the process. I mean, you cannot physically get rid of every drop of blood, but they've already bled out that cow. Now, I would ask you this. What about something like blood pudding? You guys think you ought to eat that, or blood sausage? I would tell you, I'm not really, I don't think so. I think that's wrong. I think God is, now obviously we're not under the old law. But still, I think he has kind of set forth a thing here that, hey, life is in the blood. I don't want you eating the blood. And so as a Christian who doesn't want to risk anything, I'm not going to be chucking down a bunch of blood pudding. Juanita, you had a question?
Is it also true that blood carries a lot of diseases?
Absolutely it does. And what is the central transmission? There's two transmission sites in your body that carry it throughout your body. Your bloodstream and your lymphatics. So, if I'm wanting to be conservative and err on the side of safety, I'm not going to go scarfing down any blood sausage.
Right.
And Mr. Cooper, to answer your question fully, I'd be ordering it medium rare.
Right. Even though we're not under
Yeah.
the
law, there's Acts 15 too. That was the part that the Gentiles had to keep. That blood thing is not just an old covenant thing. It's like a permanent statute of God, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, I always try to tell people, and to me, if you've read the Old Testament and you start getting the portrait of God, and you realize He doesn't change, then you understand there's certain things that please Him, certain things that don't please Him. And my argument would be, why push it, guys? And there's so much other stuff to eat. Why would you even want to, slurp down a big old thing of blood, whatever, when you've got other things that you can eat or drink? Look with me, starting in verse 14. This will pick up to where Mr. Lyle was asking me to read verse 13. For it is in the life of the flesh. Its blood sustains its life. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, you shall not eat the blood of any flesh, for the life of the flesh is its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off. Verse 15, every person who eats that which has died naturally, or that which was torn with beasts, whether it is a native of your own country or a stranger, he shall both wash his clothes and be unclean, or bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Then he shall be clean. If he does not wash them or bathe his body, then he shall bear his guilt. Why is verse 15 unique?
What do you mean unique?
Well, it's basically saying, I don't want you eating animals that have died naturally. So you got this, let's say you're on a horse, you're driving along, and you see a wild boar. Well, we'll throw the pork out because they couldn't eat that. Let's say you see a dead cow. He's in a ditch, and you look at it and you think, man, that's 600 pounds of meat. I can take that back and eat it. But he's telling them, don't do that. Why is that important?
Its blood has not drained from it properly. It hasn't been. Its blood has stayed inside of it and began to clot and everything. I mean, it hasn't drained properly. It's not all out of it. It's saturated with its own blood.
That's part of it, yes.
Not only that, but it's a good possibility that it died from a disease of some type. And of course, if you're eating that can come on you as well.
Okay, did these guys know about anthrax or rabies?
No.
The answer is no, they didn't. Do what?
Only by experience.
Only by experience. They had no clue what a bacteria was. And so if you're out in the back 40 acres and you look over and one of your prize cows dead, you don't know what's killed it. And you can imagine how many people would look at that and say, I can't let that go to waste. We need to do something with it and cut it up and eat it. God is saying, don't do that. And the reason I think that verse is very interesting or unique is the fact he's telling them not to do something even though they didn't really understand fully why. And part of the reason, as Law mentioned, they weren't drained properly. Juanita mentioned there's a lot of bacteria and stuff in blood. You got this animal that could have anthrax or mad cow disease or whatever it's got. You don't exactly want to be chopping that up and eating medium rare steaks out of it. Okay? Flipping on over to chapter 18. Laws of sexual morality. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, I am the Lord your God. Notice verse 3, please. According to the doings of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, you shall not do. And according to the doings of the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you, you shall not do. Nor shall you walk in their ordinance. What is he saying in verse 3?
Don't walk in the ways of foreign nations.
Okay? In the back.
Yeah, basically that. Don't copy what you saw in Egypt, and don't copy what you're going to see when you get to Canaan.
And let me ask this. I can't see your face as well in the back. Who is that?
Justin.
Justin Blair.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Do you have a comment, Law?
Yeah, I guess just set yourself apart from everyone around you.
Well, think about this. If we were to bring it to 2009, what do you think he's saying to us today?
Don't walk like the world.
Don't be like the world. Do we have a problem with that in the church?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Big time. Mr. Cooper.
Basically the same thing. I was just going to say, since you brought that point up, there's a lot of people who think lesbianism is fine as far as Christians, guys. I've heard this a lot because it's just two women. If I could be in that situation with two women, it'd be fine. But then they don't understand. I mean, that's still sin and it's homosexuality, no matter which way you put it.
Okay, I'm not sure who you're hanging out with.
Like I said, it's back in the past. I have a lot of friends that I've been trying to teach, but they stuck in their mind because that's what the world has taught them from videos and movies and everything. So.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're right, and that's we're in this chapter we're getting there, so to speak. We're actually going to start talking about some of that specifically. But I want you to realize, guys, God didn't just take this group of people and put them in this new land and place expectations on them without telling them. Our God is not an unfair God. He told them up front, I want you to behave like this and not like the Egyptians and not like the pagans in Canaan. You guys are going to be different. Y'all are going to be separate, a special nation. In fact, go ahead and look at verse 24. We're going to come back to some of this other, but look at verse 24 and 25. Do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. For the land is defiled. Therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity on it. The land vomits out its inhabitants. That's some pretty strong language he's given right there. The land vomits out its inhabitants? And the reason being is because these people were defiling themselves with all of these abominations. Let's go back to the beginning of this chapter. Look with me starting in verse 5. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. None of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him, to uncover his nakedness. I am the Lord. The nakedness of your father or the nakedness of your mother you shall not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of your father's wife you shall not uncover, for it is your father's nakedness. The nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father, or the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or elsewhere, their nakedness you shall not uncover. What's the big deal about right here? What is God doing right here?
Keep it outside the family.
Putting an end to allowing people to marry inside their families.
Bingo. Guys, this chapter ends incest. Chapter 18, Leviticus chapter 18, God basically is looking around. He's saying, okay, we have enough people on the land. We now have a chosen nation. We now have a priestly way of worship. We no longer need to have relationships between family members. All before this, from Adam and Eve all the way up till Leviticus 18, they were able to intermarry, have relations between family members. After this point, he says, no more. Now I don't know that we talked about it so much. You guys may have seen it on the video. Why was it okay for Adam and Eve to intermarry? Or to Adam and Eve's children to intermarry? It's okay for Adam and Eve because that's all they had.
Genetically pure.
Yes, they were pure.
They didn't have any genetic disorders. What is the problem with you marrying your first cousin today?
If we have similar genetic impurities, then they're going to be
exponentially so on our kids. You know, the offspring will happen.
Give me an example of that.
Cancer.
You're right. You're absolutely right. What was the example?
Cancer might be an example. Like, I don't know.
Possibly.
Possibly. I know, like, some of the kings way back when, you know, that might have had madness, things like that.
Michael, have you got your hand up? Yes, no, maybe. Robert, I'm sorry. Michael, Robert, you know. David, how about David? David, have you got your hand up?
No, I didn't have my
Oh,
hand
you know,
up, sorry.
I'll say enough guys' names eventually. What is
How about
the...
hemophilia?
Okay, hemophilia is a good one.
Yeah.
What
is
is
the
the...
Russian royal family used to go
Yes.
all the way through them because the woman carried it, and of course because of their system of limited breeding, they all bred in with the other royals. It was highly common to see a lot of haemophiliac sons, and of course the son being the heir, it didn't really work. The heir, it didn't really work too well because all their kings would die off by the time they got to 14, 15. Every time they fell off a swing or something, they'd bleed to death. So, yeah.
Right. What is the number one genetic mutation we worry about today between interfamily marriages?
Physical defects?
Down
How
syndrome.
about Down syndrome? Anybody ever heard of that? Yeah. That's a big one, guys. So let's say that you get lucky and you get a congregation the size of 60 in the outback of Alabama, and somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm so excited, I'm getting married. You say, oh, that's great, who are you married? And they say, my first cousin. How would you counsel that person?
Take away their shotgun and then talk to them.
Take away the banjo as well.
Yeah.
First, you give them a pair of shoes. No, I'm just kidding. Guys, you know, some of the stuff that I'm tossing out at you is not make-believe. I mean, I could have picked on Chris and said, you know, Arkansas. Because there's some people that intermarry in Arkansas as well. Not as bad as Mississippi. But the point being, guys, I think as counselors, y'all are going to have the opportunity to occasionally say, here is what God did, here's why God did it, and here's why we would take heed of it today. And so this gives you kind of some scriptural backbone to go to them and say, you know what? God did tell people to be fruitful and multiply back during the time of Adam and Eve, and he allowed them to intermarry. We know genetic mutations begin to build up in our gene pool. Leviticus 18, he says, you know what? No more relationships between family members. And that gives you a little bit of something to kind of work from in talking to somebody about that. All right, somebody read to me, starting in verse... Let's start in verse 15 and go through 22.
You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and of her daughter, nor shall you take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are blood relatives. It is lewdness. You shall not marry a woman in addition to her sister as a rival while she is alive to uncover her nakedness. Also, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness during her menstrual impurity. You shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife to be defiled with her. You shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Moloch, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female. It is an abomination.
Okay, let's back up and look at verse 21 for just a second. You shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire of Moloch. What was Moloch?
He was a Canaanite god.
Canaanite god. And what were they doing?
they were putting the babies on very, very long, kind of like pizza pans, and putting them into fire, into ovens.
All right.
Yeah.
Why would they do that?
It was just a sacrifice. They were worshiping this Canaanite god.
Guys, I think there is a powerful analogy when you are teaching and preaching people on topics like, for instance, abortion. It's very powerful to me when you stand up in front of a group of people and you look at them and you start quoting, for instance, that verse. If you look in chapter 20, verse 2, look at it. It says, again, you shall say to the children of Israel, whoever the children of Israel or the strangers who dwell in Israel, who gives any of his descendants to Molech, he shall surely be put to death. When you convey what these people were really doing, and the fact that they were chanting very loudly and singing so that the parents could not hear the screams of their children, you'll see a visible horror come across the congregation. But when you tie that to abortion, I think it brings it closer to home. You say, look, these people were actually killing their children. They were offering them up to the fires of Molech. Look at what these people were doing. And everybody in the room understands, yeah, that's horrible. I can't believe they would do that. And then you snap them back to reality and say, guys, we're doing that today. It's in a sterile environment, and it may be cleaner, and it doesn't necessarily involve a fire, but we're doing the exact same thing. Jared.
I think it's interesting to point out as well that the reason why we're doing it is because of social convenience. We're not doing it to bless the house. We're not doing it to receive blessings from a God. We're doing it because we are embarrassed or because it's a bad career choice. Or, I mean, the reasons why we're doing it now we're going to be judged so harshly for.
Yep.
Well, I see what Jared's saying, but then are we placing ourselves in that God's position? Is that what we're doing? We're doing this, these things are being done in order to worship ourselves. Because it's our time.
That's right.
It's our convenience.
Yeah.
It's because, it's our social behavior.
Did you guys read the article that came out yesterday about the lady? She's got a new book. She has had 15 abortions in 17 years. Did y'all see that? She's got a book out. It's called, let me see if I can find it real quick. It's called Impossible Motherhood, Testimony of an Abortion Addict. And again, she's had 15 abortions in 17 years. She started when she was 16 years old. And, to me, that's an abortion one time is atrocious. It's hideous. But for somebody to consciously, I mean, at this stage, I don't care what, if you're pro-choice or whatever, you can't say, well, that's because of rape or that's because of hardship. This is somebody who is literally using it as a form of birth control. So I think one of the things that we've got to be able to do in our preaching and teaching is to use the Old Testament, pull passages like this, bring them to life to people, make them see what these people were actually doing, and then bring it home to them about what we're doing today. And your comments are perfect. They're spot on as far as at least these people were doing it for a religious reason. They were hoping to at least appease a God. We're just doing it out of convenience. We're doing it because we're afraid it's going to hurt our wallet, or we're doing it because the timing's not right, or because we want to go to college, or because, you name the reason.
Well, this lady's doing it because apparently if she's an addict, she takes joy in doing it. There's still a lot of women who have abortions. They don't like doing it. They just feel like that they have to. They have no other choice in many cases, or, they're lost, and they obviously are disturbed by it. Unfortunately, they still do it, but what's sad is this lady sounds like she enjoys doing it.
Well, and the truly sickening part is if you read about this, she's obviously going to make quite a bit of money by printing a book about it. It's kind of like, okay, I'm going to sin, and not only am I going to sin, I'm going to profit from my sin because I'm going to print a book or write a movie or whatever and tell everybody about it. And to me, that's pretty bad.
She's making a profit off of being a serial killer, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bingo. All right, now let's look at the next verse. We looked at 21. You shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire of Molech. So name a couple of the other gods that were there in Canaan. Who were people worshiping? Baal. Molech. Make yourself familiar with some of these gods, where they came from, what the people thought of them. We did an issue of Think about 3 months ago where we outlined some of the gods that they were worshiping back during this time and what it, originally where it was derived from and that kind of thing. And it helps as you're teaching people. It allows you to provide some depth so that you don't just read the words. You're able to say, hey, Moloch, this guy, he was a god of the Canaanites who they felt like could make their family stronger and fertile and yada, yada, yada. And it provides a lot more depth to what you're trying to communicate. Jared?
Does that article have references in it, Brad, for where we can go to find more detail?
I tell you what, I will, I'll during our break, I'll hunt it down.
Yeah.
And do you guys get Think?
Yeah, we do.
Because, if you don't, I can send, 10 or 15 copies to the school every month.
If
Do what?
we can find the issue, we can go from there.
Okay, I'll tell you which one it is.
Yeah.
Verse 22, you shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. What's that mean?
Homosexuality.
Homosexuality is wrong. Now, we've already... Notice how we're progressing here, guys. We're progressing through time, and we start out in Genesis, and God says, okay, I want a heterosexual family. Then we move on through Genesis, and we get Sodom and Gomorrah. Now we're in the book of Leviticus. We start the priestly nation, and he is reminding them, this is what I expect of you. You don't lie with a male as with a woman. Notice verse 23. Nor shall you mate with any animal to defile yourself with it. What's that against?
You're talking about bestiality?
There we go. You guys need your caffeine early. Bestiality. Is bestiality real?
Yeah.
Guys, it's growing in this country. If you do a quick, like a Google search on books, bestiality, you'll find unfortunately, a lot of titles that are available at places like Barnes & Noble and such. There are a lot more laws that are just now coming out within the last 6 months where people are trying to get laws passed that allow humans to mate with animals. Because they're basically riding the coattails of the homosexual agenda, saying it's our right to be able to do this. And yet, here we've got very clear scripture that says, you shall not mate with any animal. God did not design us for that purpose. How would you defend a position of not mating with an animal to somebody who may think that that's okay? Let's say that you're at a person's house playing cards at your church, and they say, well, I wouldn't do it ever, but I don't really think there's anything wrong with it. I don't see why we need to pass a law about it. What do you say?
Are they a Christian, Brad?
Sorry. Maybe a new Christian.
You can start with Adam.
Yeah.
God couldn't find a helper suitable for Adam from all the animals.
Great answer. What else?
When you talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, that's the part I missed on the test. So I remember you writing it in red.
Oh, man, he's holding a grudge on me. What? All right, let me share with you guys. Y'all need to understand that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in class like this is going to be things that you, either through casual conversation or through actual hands-on, are going to be things that you will have to deal with. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that I would ever see or have to worry about bestiality. I was working in the ER one day, and lo and behold, they brought a lady and a German Shepherd into the ER on the same stretcher. They were attached, shall we say. It's one of those things, it's real, it's out there, and it's something that when you preach from the pulpit, occasionally you will need to reference and at least make people aware, even though society is starting to soften in this area. I mean, I think within the next 3 or 4 years, you'll start seeing TV shows that subtly introduce this idea, just like they did 10 years ago with homosexuality. You know, it wasn't always where you turn on the TV and they had a homosexual character. They had to very slowly start seeping it in, allowing the culture to get desensitized to that idea, to where it's become, now you flip on the TV and it's almost surprising if you don't have a homosexual character. Yes, sir.
It's already there. You can, Family Guy has Brian the dog with a woman.
There you go. I don't know that show, but there you go.
You don't want it.
I don't have time to watch TV anymore. All right, so we've already read verses 24 and 25. Do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. The land is defiled, therefore I visit its punishment of its iniquity upon it. The land vomits out its inhabitants. I will commonly, if I'm teaching on the practice of homosexuality, I will oftentimes refer to those verses to let folks know how serious this is, how serious this type of defilement is. Verse 26, you shall therefore keep my statutes, my judgments, shall not commit any of these abominations, either any of your own nation or any stranger who dwells among you. So that's interesting. He's telling them, not only are you not supposed to do it, but if somebody comes to your nation, you don't let them do it. Which is an interesting thing that we're facing right now in the United States of America, where we used to have certain laws, and basically the idea was, okay, if you're Muslim, if you're Buddhist, you can come here, but you're going to uphold our laws. And now what are we doing? We're changing the laws to accommodate them. God was basically saying, you got one standard, one law, here it is, you obey it, and even strangers in your land need to obey it, and yet we find ourselves kind of giving in. Verse 27, for all these abominations the men of the land have done who were before you, and thus the land is defiled, lest the land vomit you out also when you defile it, as it vomited out the nations who were before you. For whoever commits any of these abominations, the persons who commit them shall be cut off from among my people, or among their people. Therefore you shall keep my ordinance, so that you do not commit any of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that you may not defile yourselves by them. I am the Lord your God. You might circle abominable customs on verse 30. If you ever want to preach a strong lesson to a congregation, you've only got one shot at it. You teach them about abominable customs of the Old Testament, and you show them what all they were doing, and then you show them what America's doing today, and you ask them if there's any similarities. And that is a strong message of where our society is, guys. Any questions on chapter 18?
I have a couple.
Yeah.
Talking about not intermarrying, like, in the family, and you mentioned cousins, and I don't have a thing for my cousin or anything, but he doesn't specifically mention cousins in the chapter. I don't think. I didn't see it anyway.
No. It's all related directly, as in your mother, your father, your brother, your sister. It has been our government that has come in and said first cousin. And again, that is a genetic issue. Because first cousins, you still have enough genetic material that is similar to your parents. I mean, think about it for just a moment. What you would actually be marrying is not your brother and sister, but your parents' brothers and sisters' offspring. So there's still quite a bit of, similar DNA there. For instance, if in your mom's side there's a recessive gene for X, and your mom has it, more than likely her brother may have it. And if your mom passed it on to you and her brother passed it on to her child, you guys get married, then that recessive trait is going to show itself. There's a lot better chance. Versus you just having, a relationship with somebody out in the world.
And then also with verse 21, to me it doesn't look like, God put it there, so that's where it belongs, but it doesn't look like it fits with the rest of the context. Is there anything, all these other laws.
Which one?
Verse 21 about offering your offspring to Molech. There's like all the other laws are sexual morality, and then that one's different.
Well, when you think about the fact that part of that was for fertility, Molech, part of the issue with Molech was they would appease him with one of their children in hopes of having a massive family. Usually, and I'd have to check on this, I think it's normally their firstborn that they would offer. But I think that's how it's going to fit in the context. Let me go back and look at that. Yes, sir.
Isn't it just kind of setting up the detestable activities that are going on in those lands? That's what kind of where it starts, and with the worship of those kind of idols and those type of practices, where you'll end up, kind of.
God is absolutely laying down morality issues right here, folks. There's no doubt that He is saying, even though these other people do this and get away with it and think it's acceptable, from here on out, this is the moral code that we're going to follow. Justin, do you have a question in the back?
I was just going to ask if it seems like that law could easily become sacrificing children to Molech that you didn't really want to get something good for them. Like, hey, I don't really want this kid, but maybe if I sacrifice him to Molech, maybe I could get some riches or some blessings.
Possibly. Let's see. Let me see if I can give you a real quick answer here. Burning children alive, dangerous ritual, biblical context. Word translated here literally as seed very often means offspring. The law of Moses forbade it. It's actually repeated 4 different times in the text. I'll hunt a little bit more and see if we can't make that fit in. But, realistically, all of these are going to be morality issues. Chapter 19, we're starting ceremonial laws, but we finish up some of the moral laws. Morality is not always just a sexual type of issue. Morality can deal with how you treat others. It can deal with finances, all that kind of good stuff. Verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the children of the congregation of the children of Israel. Say to them, you shall be holy, for I am the Lord your God, am holy. So, you want to know one of the characteristics of God we need to keep in mind? There's your answer right there. He's telling them over and over and over, I'm holy. I'm different. Don't commit abominations like these other people. And yet, our attitude today in a worship setting to God is, I'm okay, you're okay. I think we got to get back to getting people's minds on the fact that, yes, God is holy. We are to be reverent. We are to acknowledge the fact that He is the Almighty. Because I see a very relaxed, a very almost a cavalier attitude towards God. It's kind of like, He's a God of love and grace, everything's good, we're all right. When He is trying to impress so strongly here the fact that I'm holy, you're to be holy. The very next verse, every one of you shall revere his father and his mother. Keep my Sabbath. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols, nor make yourself any molded gods. I am the Lord your God. And if you offer a sacrifice of peace offering to the Lord, you shall offer it of your own free will. So he is declaring to these people, number one, I want you to do this willingly to me, but number two, I want you to physically change your behavior for me. And that's an area where I think we need to focus on in the church, is allowing our religion to actually change our actions, our behavior. I think a lot of people say, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I don't know that they're willing to actually change their actions. Yes, Mr. David.
Going along with that, and also what was said in the last chapter, what is your opinion on levels of idolatry as far as people today? I mean, we go to the church building and we see people talking more about sports and the latest TV shows and video games, movies, rather than God. You can ask a kid the intimate details of a star's life, but you ask them about the Bible and they give you a blank stare. What's your opinion on all that?
My opinion on idolatry is anything that separates you from God, period. It definitely does not have to be a little statue of Buddha. It doesn't have to be a statue or a golden image. And I think probably, Paul nailed it when he said covetousness is idolatry. There's one of the biggest forms that we struggle with today, and that is materialism, wanting to keep up with the Joneses. And as far as our kids knowing more about video games and movies, to me, that is a sign of poor parenting. I struggle with that. My wife and I try to be very diligent at teaching our kids. I have a son that has a photographic memory that absolutely is beyond, it's almost scary. He's sharp. He can pull verses out of the Bible better than just about any preacher I've ever seen. I mean, little weird, obscure stuff. He'll be like, well, Dad, that's over in Malachi. And I'm like, what in the world? I'm like, you're kind of a freak. But this is the same son that also thinks Peyton Manning hung the moon. And we have to be very careful at our house how much we allow that football influence for him. And I think that is my responsibility as a parent to make sure he doesn't elevate NFL football and Peyton Manning above spiritual matters. And that's something that we do at our home. I mean, he is constantly reminded, that's a football game. It really doesn't matter what the score is tomorrow. This matters. Yes, sir.
Haven't you noticed in the South, one of the things that's mainly idolatrized is gender?
Let me get my grade sheet out here. That would be for people who can actually afford the real ones versus those people who have to get the little cheap toys. See? There you go. That is wrong. How do you guys picture idolatry today? What do you think people are worshiping in the year 2009?
Well, one thing, a good example of it is a show we've got that calls themselves American Idol.
Yeah.
I mean, people worship basically those people that are on those shows. Especially the ones.
That's a good point. By the way, do you know that if you're over, I think it's the age 34, you can't be on that show, which means we can never idolize anybody that's old, even though what does the Bible tell us about getting honor and when you think about when you think about what that gray head really means and how much honor and wisdom they have, that's where we need to be idolizing. Take a break.